I followed the clues to a massive government facility built around a crater in the desert, and what I saw there changed everything.
If you've ever wondered what really happens in the remote sections of the US-Mexico border, hit that like button. Some stories don't make it into official reports. My name is Danny Reeves, and in 1989 I was assigned to the Lordsburg Station in southwestern New Mexico, about 30 miles from the Mexican border. Lordsburg Station covers some of the most remote, hostile terrain in the entire Border Patrol's jurisdiction. Desert that can kill you in a day without water. Mountains that hide smuggling routes used for 100 years. And something else. Something we're not supposed to talk about. We call it Zone 19. Officially, it doesn't exist. There's no mention of it in our patrol maps, no designation in our sector briefings, no reference to it in any document you can access through normal channels. But every agent who works Lordsburg knows about it. A 60-mile stretch of border where we're explicitly forbidden to conduct patrols. I learned about Zone 19 on my third day at the station. My training officer, a 20-year veteran named Guylan Wilson, was showing me our patrol sectors when he stopped the truck at a ridge overlooking a valley. "See that fence line?" he said, pointing to a section of border fence visible in the distance. "That's as far east as we patrol. Everything beyond that, you don't go there. Ever." "Why not?" I asked. "What's out there?" Wilson was quiet for a moment. "Nothing you need to worry about. Just follow the rule. Stay west of that fence line. Don't cross into Zone 19. Don't investigate anything you see or hear coming from that direction. And if you see people trying to cross from that area, you let them go. Don't pursue. Don't engage. Just report it to the supervisor and move on." "That doesn't make sense," I said. "If people are crossing there, they're not our problem," Wilson interrupted. "Zone 19 is under different jurisdiction. Military, probably, or some federal agency with clearance above our level. Our job is to patrol everywhere except there." "Clear?" I nodded, but I wasn't satisfied. A 60-mile gap in border coverage didn't make operational sense. Smugglers would exploit it immediately. Cartels would use it as a primary crossing point, unless there was something about Zone 19 that made crossing there undesirable. Something worse than border patrol. Over the next few weeks, I settled into the routine of Lordsburg Station. Long shifts patrolling dirt roads and tracking sign in the desert. Checking water stations. Processing the occasional apprehension. It was hard work in brutal conditions, but it was honest work. Except for that nagging question about Zone 19, I started paying attention to what the other agents said about it. Most wouldn't discuss it at all. The few who would speak about it did so in vague terms. Stay away from there. Nothing good comes out of Zone 19. Let it be. The warnings were consistent but never specific. Then I met Sarah Chen, an agent who'd been at Lordsburg for 8 years. She was more willing to talk than most, maybe because she was planning to transfer to El Paso and didn't care about local politics anymore. I asked her directly what was in Zone 19. She looked around to make sure we were alone, then said quietly, "I don't know exactly what's there, but I can tell you what happens near there. Cattle mutilations. Dozens of them over the years. Ranchers find their livestock dead, surgically cut, organs removed with precision that shouldn't be possible with normal tools. No blood on the ground. No tracks leading to or from the carcasses. Just dead animals appearing overnight in perfect condition except for the mutilations. That's been happening since the 50s, I said. All over the Southwest. Probably natural predation or cult activity." Chen shook her head. "These are different. The cattle are only found near the Zone 19 boundary, never more than a mile from that fence line. And it's not just cattle. Hikers have gone missing in that area. Smugglers who used to cross there stopped coming back. The cartels avoid it now. There's a reason that 60-mile stretch stays empty, and it's not because of Border Patrol presence. What do you think is there? I asked. Chen looked me in the eye. I think there's a government facility, something classified. And I think whatever they're doing there sometimes gets loose. That's why we're not allowed to patrol it. Not to leave a gap in coverage, but because they don't want us seeing what comes out of that place. She transferred to El Paso 2 weeks later. I didn't blame her, but her words stayed with me. A government facility, something that gets loose. It fit with what I'd observed. The military helicopters I'd occasionally see flying low over that area at night. The unmarked trucks that would sometimes pass through Lordsburg heading toward the zone. The fact that our supervisors would get nervous whenever anyone asked questions about it. In my 3rd month at Lordsburg, I had my first direct encounter with Zone 19. I was on solo patrol, following a set of footprints that led east from a known smuggling route. Standard tracking work, the kind I'd done dozens of times. But these prints were strange. They weren't trying to hide, weren't taking the careful paths smugglers usually used. They walked straight toward the zone boundary in a direct line, like whoever made them had a specific destination. I followed them for about 5 miles. Then they reached the fence line that marked Zone 19, and they stopped. Not because of the fence. The prints went right up to it and then simply ended. Like the person had evaporated at the boundary. I searched the area carefully. No indication they'd doubled back. No sign they'd climbed the fence. The tracks just stopped at that exact line, mid-stride, as if the person had stepped into nothing. I was taking photos of the prints when I heard the helicopter. Military, black, no markings. It came in low and fast, landing about 200 yards from my position. 4 people in tactical gear got out, all carrying equipment I didn't recognize. One of them approached me. "Border Patrol?" he asked, though my uniform made that obvious. "Agent Reeves, Lordsburg Station," I said. "I'm tracking a subject who—" "You're outside your patrol zone," he interrupted. "This area is restricted. You need to leave immediately." "I'm following footprints," I said. "Someone crossed here recently and their trail ends at this fence. If there's restricted federal land on the other side, I need to know if my subject entered it." The man looked at the tracks, then back at me. "There's no one on this side of the fence. Your subject went a different direction. You missed the turn. I suggest you go back and re-examine your trail." "That's not possible," I said. "I've been tracking for 5 miles. The prints are clear." "Agent Reeves," the man said, his voice hardening, "you're going to get in your vehicle and return to your station. You're going to file a report that says you lost the trail after 3 miles. And you're going to forget you were ever in this location. Is that clear?" I wanted to argue, but the way his hand rested near his sidearm, the way the other 3 tactical team members had positioned themselves to surround me, told me this wasn't a discussion. It was an order backed by force. I got in my truck and drove back to the station. But I didn't forget. And I started paying very close attention to Zone 19. Over the next few months, I documented everything I could observe from outside the boundary. The helicopters flew in 3 times a week, always at night. The unmarked trucks arrived every Tuesday at dawn. And once a month, there would be a period of about 6 hours where the sky above Zone 19 would glow with a strange blue-green light that reminded me of the aurora borealis. Except we were 1,000 miles south of where auroras should appear. I also started researching the area's history. I found that the land now designated as Zone 19 had been federal property since 1947. Before that, it had been part of a large cattle ranch. The ranch was forcibly purchased by the government in March 1947, just a few months before the Roswell incident. The timing seemed significant. I found old newspaper articles about the ranch. The family who'd owned it had fought the federal purchase, claiming the government was seizing their land without just compensation. They'd lost the case. The last article I found was from 1948, a small obituary noting that the former ranch owner had died in a car accident. No mention of the controversy, no follow-up about the land. Then I found something that changed everything. A declassified document from 1952, released under FOIA in 1987. It was a military memo discussing the establishment of a research facility codenamed Project Threshold. The memo was heavily redacted, but a few details were clear. The facility was located in southwestern New Mexico. It was studying atmospheric phenomena, and it required a 60-mile security buffer to prevent civilian exposure to research activities. Zone 19 wasn't just restricted. It was the buffer zone for Project Threshold. Whatever they were researching there, it was dangerous enough to require 60 miles of empty desert as a safety margin. I showed the document to Wilson, hoping he might open up about what he knew. He looked at it for a long time, then handed it back. "Where did you get this?" "FOIA request," I said. "It's declassified." "The project is declassified. The details aren't." Wilson sighed. "Look, Reeves, I understand you're curious, but this is the kind of curiosity that ends careers. Maybe worse. You want my advice? Transfer to a different station. Go somewhere without a Zone 19. Live a normal Border Patrol career and forget you ever saw that document." "What if I don't want to forget?" Wilson's expression was grim. "Then you'll end up like Miller." "Who's Miller?" "Agent who worked here in the early 80s. Got obsessed with Zone 19, started investigating it on his own time. One night he went out there during his off-duty hours, said he was going to see what was really happening. That was in 1983. They found his truck 3 days later, parked at the zone boundary. No sign of Miller, no footprints leading away, just an empty vehicle with the keys still in the ignition. What do they think happened to him?" Wilson leaned in close. "Officially, he deserted. Unofficially, he crossed into Zone 19 and whatever they're keeping in there got him. He's not the first person to disappear near that facility, and he probably won't be the last." I should have listened to Wilson. Should have requested a transfer and left Zone 19 alone. But I couldn't let it go. The unexplained disappearances, the cattle mutilations, the strange lights, Miller's fate. It all pointed to something happening in that facility that the government desperately wanted to keep secret. I decided I needed to see Zone 19 for myself. Not an official patrol, but a careful reconnaissance during my day off. I'd park far enough away to avoid detection, hike in at night, and observe the facility from a distance, just to understand what I was dealing with. I spent 2 weeks planning, studied topographical maps, identified approach routes that would keep me in dead ground, invisible to observation, acquired night vision equipment and a good camera with a telephoto lens. I told my girlfriend Jessica I was going camping in the Gila wilderness for a weekend. Packed my truck and drove out on a Friday afternoon. I parked about 15 miles from the zone boundary and hiked in after sunset. The desert at night is beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Stars so bright they cast shadows. Complete silence except for the wind and the occasional coyote. And the constant awareness that you're alone in terrain that can kill you. It took me 4 hours to reach a ridge that overlooked Zone 19. I set up position behind a rock formation and pulled out my night vision binoculars. What I saw made my blood run cold. The facility was massive, far larger than I'd imagined. A complex of buildings arranged in a grid pattern, surrounded by multiple fence lines and guard towers. Bright lights illuminated the central area, and I could see vehicles moving between structures. But it was what I saw beyond the main facility that disturbed me. there was a crater. A huge circular depression in the earth, maybe a quarter-mile across. The walls of the crater glowed with that same blue-green light I'd seen from a distance. And around the rim of the crater, I could see equipment. Massive machines that looked like industrial drills or pumps, all pointed down into the crater. As I watched, one of the machines activated. The noise was incredible even from 2 miles away, a deep bass rumble that I felt in my chest more than heard with my ears. The blue-green light intensified, and I could see something moving in the crater. Something that rose up from the depths, writhing and twisting in the light. I focused my binoculars on it, trying to understand what I was seeing. It looked biological, but wrong, like a mass of tissue and organs exposed to the air, pulsing and contracting. But it was huge, the size of a building, and it was clearly responding to whatever the machines were doing. Then it screamed. Not a sound exactly, but a vibration that passed through the ground and the air simultaneously. I felt it in my bones, in my teeth, in the base of my skull. And with that scream came an overwhelming sense of wrongness, of something that shouldn't exist, that violated the fundamental rules of reality just by being. I dropped the binoculars and backed away from the ridge, fighting the urge to run. That thing in the crater wasn't human, wasn't animal. It was something else entirely. Something they were keeping in that facility, controlling with those machines, studying for purposes I couldn't imagine. That's when I heard the helicopter. No lights, pure black against the stars coming straight toward my position. They detected me somehow, despite my precautions. Thermal imaging maybe, or motion sensors I hadn't accounted for. I ran, grabbed my gear and sprinted down the ridge back toward where I'd left my truck. The helicopter paced me, staying overhead but not landing. They were herding me, making sure I was leaving their territory. I reached my truck and drove away fast, not stopping until I was back in Lordsburg. My heart didn't stop racing for hours. I kept seeing that thing in the crater, kept feeling that vibration in my bones. The next day, I found a note on my truck. Plain white paper, no signature. It said, "Agent Reeves, you saw something you shouldn't have seen. File your FOIA document in a secure location. If anything happens to you, have it released publicly. That's your insurance. Don't come back to Zone 19. Don't ask questions. Live your life, and this stays between us. Violate this agreement and you disappear. Those are your options." I knew I should be terrified. Knew I should request an immediate transfer and run as far from New Mexico as possible. But I also knew I couldn't let this go. Whatever they were keeping in that crater, whatever Project Threshold was really about, it was too important to ignore. So I made a decision. I'd find out what that thing was. I'd learn what they were doing to it. And if it was dangerous, if it threatened people, I'd expose it. Even if it meant ending up like Miller. Even if it meant disappearing into Zone 19 and never coming back. Because some secrets are too dangerous to keep hidden, and some things need to be exposed, no matter the cost. I spent the next week doing my regular patrols while trying to figure out my next move. The note had been clear: stay away or disappear. But the threat also confirmed what I'd suspected. Whatever was in Zone 19, they were desperate to keep it secret. Desperate enough to threaten a federal law enforcement officer. I needed information. Not just speculation or observation from a distance, but real intel about Project Threshold and what they were doing in that crater. The problem was, I didn't know who to trust. Wilson had warned me to drop it. Chen had transferred away. And I couldn't go through official channels without alerting the people who'd threatened me. Then I remembered something Chen had mentioned before she left. She'd said cattle mutilations happened near the Zone 19 boundary. If I could document those mutilations, study the patterns, Maybe I could learn something about what was escaping from that facility. I started talking to ranchers, told them I was investigating livestock losses in the area as part of Border Patrol's community outreach program. Most were happy to talk, frustrated that law enforcement had never taken their concern seriously. A rancher named Tom Bradford had lost 6 head of cattle in the past year, all within 5 miles of Zone 19. He showed me photos of the carcasses. The cuts were surgical, impossibly precise. Organs removed through small incisions that showed no tearing or force. And like Chen had said, there was no blood on the ground. The cattle had been exsanguinated completely, but there was no sign of where the blood had gone. When did these happen? I asked. Bradford pulled out a calendar where he'd marked the incidents. First week of every month, he said, like clockwork. I lose 1 or 2 head right after the new moon. Been happening since 1985. I've reported it to the sheriff, to the state livestock board, even tried calling the FBI once. Nobody cares. They just write it off as natural predation and file the reports away. I looked at the calendar. The pattern was precise. Every month, in the week following the new moon, cattle would die near Zone 19. That timing had to mean something. Either whatever was in that crater had a monthly cycle, or the facility was conducting some kind of periodic experiment. Have you ever seen anything unusual in the area? I asked. Lights, aircraft, people who shouldn't be there? Bradford hesitated, then nodded. Few times I've been out checking on cattle at night, I've seen lights in the sky, not normal aircraft lights. These move wrong. Too fast, then suddenly stop. Change direction without slowing down. My grandfather used to talk about seeing the same kind of lights back in the 40s, before the government took over that land. Did your grandfather ever say what he thought they were? Bradford's expression darkened. He thought the government was digging something up out there, something that had been buried in the desert for a very long time. He said before they forced him to sell in 1947, he'd seen them excavating something from that crater. Something big. He tried to get closer to see what it was, and that's when the military showed up and escorted him off his own property at gunpoint. 2 weeks later, the government filed eminent domain papers and seized the whole ranch. Do you know what happened to your grandfather after that? Died in a car accident 6 months later, Bradford said. Single vehicle crash on a straight road in good weather. My father always suspected it wasn't an accident, but he could never prove anything. I thanked Bradford and left with copies of his documentation. The pattern was becoming clearer. The facility in Zone 19 had been established in 1947, right after they excavated something from that crater. Whatever it was still there, still being studied or contained, and periodically something associated with it was killing cattle in a way that suggested advanced technology or biological processes we didn't understand. But I needed more than cattle mutilations to prove something dangerous was happening. I needed direct evidence of what was in that crater, and that meant I needed to get inside the facility itself. Over the next 2 weeks, I observed the facility's patterns from outside Zone 19. The unmarked trucks arrived every Tuesday at 6 a.m., carrying what looked like equipment or supplies. Personnel changes happened on Fridays, with helicopters ferrying people in and out. And once a month, on the night of the new moon, all activity stopped for exactly 6 hours. No helicopters, no vehicles, no visible personnel. The facility went completely dark. That monthly shutdown was my opportunity. If I could enter Zone 19 during that window, when security was presumably reduced, I might be able to get close enough to document what was really happening there. The next new moon was in 2 weeks. I started preparing. I requisitioned a new set of night vision equipment through Border Patrol, claiming I needed it for desert tracking. I purchased a radiation detector with my own money, suspecting that whatever was in that crater might be giving off unusual emissions. and I wrote everything I'd learned into a detailed report, sealed it, and left it with Jessica along with instructions to send it to multiple news outlets if I didn't return within 48 hours. She tried to talk me out of it. "This is crazy, Danny. You're talking about breaking into a classified military facility. You could go to prison. You could get killed." "I know," I said, "but people are disappearing. Cattle are being mutilated. There's something in that crater that the government has been hiding for over 40 years. If it's dangerous, if there's any chance it could escape or be weaponized, someone needs to know about it." "And that someone has to be you?" she asked. "You can't just report what you found through official channels?" I tried to explain about the threats, about Miller's disappearance, about how deep this cover-up went. But I could see in her eyes she thought I was becoming paranoid. Maybe I was, but paranoia didn't mean I was wrong. The night of the new moon, I drove out to my usual observation point and waited. Sure enough, at 9 p.m., all the lights at the facility went dark. The helicopters that had been making regular patrols landed and shut down. The compound went silent. I approached from the north, using a dry riverbed for cover. It took me 3 hours to reach the outer fence line. No guards visible, no patrols. The monthly shutdown was real. I cut through the fence with wire cutters and moved into Zone 19. The desert was absolutely silent. No wind, no animal sounds, nothing. Just the crunch of my boots on hard-packed earth and the sound of my own breathing. I moved carefully toward the facility, watching for sensors or cameras, but everything seemed powered down. I reached the edge of the crater around midnight. Up close, it was even more massive than I'd realized. The walls dropped away into darkness, and that blue-green glow was stronger here, pulsing from somewhere deep below. I could hear something too, a rhythmic sound like breathing coming from the depths. I set up my camera and started documenting everything. The equipment around the crater rim, the drilling mechanisms pointed down into the earth, the massive cables running from generators into the darkness below. And then I made a mistake. I leaned out over the edge to get a better angle, and my foot dislodged a rock. The rock tumbled down into the crater, bouncing off the walls, falling into that blue-green light. And the moment it hit bottom, everything changed. The breathing sound stopped. The light pulsed brighter. And from deep in the crater, something started moving upward. I could see it through my night vision, a massive shape rising through the darkness. The same biological mass I'd seen before, but now it was coming toward me. I ran, dropped my camera, and ran back toward the fence, no longer caring about stealth or documentation. Behind me, I could hear that thing emerging from the crater, could feel the ground shaking as it moved, and that scream started again, that bone-deep vibration that made my vision blur and my thoughts scatter. I reached the fence and dove through the hole I'd cut, scrambling to put distance between myself and whatever was pursuing me. But when I looked back, nothing was there. The crater was silent again. The shape had stopped at the rim, not crossing out of the facility boundaries, like it was contained by something more than just fences. I made it back to my truck and drove away, shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. I'd gotten close to whatever they were hiding in Zone 19, closer than anyone had in decades. And I'd learned something crucial. That thing in the crater was aware. It had responded to my presence, had started to emerge when I disturbed it, but it was being held in place by something, some kind of containment that kept it from leaving the facility. The question was, how long would that containment hold? And what would happen if it failed? I didn't know the answers, but I knew I needed to find out, because whatever was in that crater, it was getting stronger. And the government's ability to contain it might not last forever. I didn't go to work for 3 days after my incursion into Zone 19. Called in sick, told Wilson I had the flu. Spent those days in my apartment, drinking coffee and reviewing everything I'd learned. The cattle mutilations, the monthly cycles, the thing in the crater that responded to disturbance, Miller's disappearance. It all pointed to something that had been going on since 1947, something the government had managed to keep secret for over 40 years. On the fourth day, Wilson showed up at my door. "You look like hell," he said. "I feel like hell," I replied. He pushed past me into the apartment. "We need to talk, off the record." I made coffee while Wilson sat at my kitchen table, looking uncomfortable. Finally, he said, "I know you went into Zone 19. Don't bother denying it. The facility detected an incursion during the monthly shutdown. They're reviewing sensor data now, trying to identify who it was. You have maybe 48 hours before they connect it to you." "How do you know all this?" Wilson sighed. "Because I used to work there. Before I joined Border Patrol, I was military security at Project Threshold from 1975 to 1980. That's why they assigned me to Lordsburg Station after I got out, to keep an eye on the zone, make sure no Border Patrol agents got too curious." "So you've known what's in that crater all along," I said. Wilson nodded. "And I've spent the past 9 years trying to forget it. But since you've already seen it, since you're already marked, you deserve to know the truth. Maybe it'll save your life. Probably it won't, but at least you'll understand what you're dealing with." He pulled out a flask and took a long drink before continuing. In 1947, a rancher reported finding something in a crater on his property. Not a meteor, not a sinkhole. Something that had been buried there for a very long time, maybe thousands of years. The military investigated and found biological material at the bottom of that crater. Living tissue that showed no signs of decay despite being entombed in rock and sediment. They brought in scientists. Geologists dated the surrounding strata at over 50,000 years old. But the tissue was alive, responsive to stimuli. It didn't match any known organism. The cell structure was wrong. The DNA, when they finally figured out how to sequence it in the 70s, didn't match anything on Earth. "What is it?" I asked. "We don't know," Wilson said. "Best theory is some kind of extremophile organism that evolved in conditions completely different from Earth's surface. Maybe it came from deep underground, from thermal vents or subterranean oceans we don't know exist. Maybe it's actually extraterrestrial, buried here by impact millions of years ago." The scientists couldn't agree. What they did agree on was that it was dangerous. Dangerous how? Wilson took another drink. "The tissue is predatory. It absorbs organic matter on contact. And it's smart. Not intelligent in the way we understand it, but adaptive. It learns. Early experiments showed it could mimic the cellular structure of anything it absorbed. Feed it cow tissue, it starts growing cow organs. Feed it human tissue, it starts developing human-like structures." "Jesus," I said. "And you've been keeping this thing alive in that crater for 40 years?" Wilson shook his head. "We're not keeping it alive. We're keeping it contained. The organism is immortal as far as we can tell. It doesn't age, doesn't decay, doesn't need external energy sources. It just exists, waiting to absorb more organic matter. The machinery you saw around the crater isn't feeding it. It's preventing it from growing beyond a certain size. Electromagnetic fields that inhibit cellular division. Thermal controls that keep it in a semi-dormant state. But it's getting stronger, isn't it?" I said. "The monthly shutdowns, the cattle mutilations. It's breaking through the containment." Wilson's expression was grim. "The organism has been growing more active since the mid-80s. We think it's adapting to the containment protocols, evolving resistance to the electromagnetic fields. During the monthly shutdowns, when we cycle the equipment for maintenance, it sends out what we call probes, tendrils of tissue that can extend several miles from the crater. That's what's killing the cattle." The organism is testing its range, gathering organic matter to fuel growth. And you're just letting it happen? I demanded. You're letting this thing kill livestock, letting it get stronger and doing nothing to stop it. What would you have us do? Wilson asked. Destroy it? We've tried fire, acid, radiation. Nothing works. The tissue regenerates from even microscopic fragments. We tried to burn it in 1951, thought we'd succeeded. 3 months later, it had regrown from cells that had survived in the soil. We tried radiation in 1962. Nearly caused a meltdown. The organism absorbed the radiation and used it to accelerate growth. After that, we accepted that containment was our only option. So you're just going to keep it there forever? Hope the containment holds? Wilson looked at me seriously. Not forever. The facility has a fail-safe. If containment is breached beyond recovery, if the organism escapes into the general environment, there's a protocol. They'll sterilize the entire area. Probably with nuclear weapons. Better to sacrifice a few hundred square miles of desert than let that thing reach a populated area. I felt cold. You're talking about nuking American soil. I'm talking about preventing an extinction event, Wilson said. That organism can absorb and replicate any biological material. If it reaches a city, if it gets access to millions of human hosts, it could convert the entire population in days. Every person it absorbs makes it smarter, more capable. And there's no known way to stop it once it reaches critical mass. Why are you telling me this? I asked. If it's so classified, so dangerous, why risk telling me? Because you're not going to stop investigating, Wilson said. I know the type. You'll keep pushing, keep looking for answers, until they either kill you or you force them to use the failsafe. I'd rather you understand what's at stake. Maybe you'll be smart enough to walk away. I'm not walking away, I said. If this thing is that dangerous, people need to know. We need better containment, more resources, international cooperation. You're not listening, Wilson interrupted. There are no better containment options. Every expert who studied that organism has come to the same conclusion. We can't destroy it. We can't control it long term. All we can do is keep it isolated and hope it doesn't evolve past our countermeasures before we figure out a permanent solution. And if it does evolve past the countermeasures, Wilson stood up. Then we trigger the failsafe and pray the nuclear option is enough to sterilize it completely. But Reeves, that's not your concern anymore. As of today, you're being transferred to the San Diego sector. Orders came through this morning. You leave in 72 hours. I didn't request a transfer. No, Wilson said. But someone requested it for you, someone who thinks you're a threat that needs to be neutralized. Be grateful they chose transfer instead of something more permanent. Take the reassignment. Go to California. Forget you ever saw Zone 19. After Wilson left, I sat in my apartment trying to process everything I'd learned. An immortal organism from an unknown origin. Containment that was gradually failing. A government prepared to nuke its own territory rather than let the organism escape. And me being shuffled away to California before I could cause more problems. I should have taken the transfer, should have packed my things and driven to San Diego without looking back. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was being left unsaid. Wilson had told me about the organism, about the containment, about the failsafe. But he hadn't told me about Miller. Hadn't explained what really happened to agents who disappeared near Zone 19. I needed answers, and I knew where to find them. That night, I drove back out to the desert. Not to Zone 19 this time, but to the location where they'd found Miller's truck in 1983. According to the reports, it had been discovered at the zone boundary, keys in the ignition, no sign of Miller himself. I found the spot using GPS coordinates from the incident report. The truck was long gone, but the area was still marked on my map. I parked and started searching in widening circles looking for anything that might have been missed in the original investigation. I found it after 2 hours. A BDU jacket, military style, partially buried in sand about 100 yards from where the truck had been. The name tape was still legible. Miller. I pulled it from the sand carefully, and as I did, something fell out of the pocket. A small notebook, weathered but still readable. Miller's journal. The final entries detailed his investigation of Zone 19, his observations of the facility, his growing certainty that something dangerous was being concealed. The last entry was dated the day he disappeared. Tonight, I'm going in. I've spotted a maintenance tunnel on the east side of the crater. Looks like it was used for initial excavation in '47 and then sealed. But the seals have degraded. I can get in, see what they're really doing down there. If I don't make it back, tell them it wasn't an accident. Tell them what's really in that crater needs to be exposed, no matter the cost. Below that, in different ink, shakier handwriting. They found me in the tunnel, said I'd seen too much to leave, gave me a choice. Work for them or become part of the organism. I chose work. They're making me write this for whoever finds it, to show what happens when you don't follow the rules. Stay away from Zone 19. Miller is gone. What's left is something else now. I felt sick. Miller hadn't disappeared. He'd been caught, and they'd given him to the organism. Probably as a test to see how it would process human tissue. And apparently, they'd gotten enough control over the resulting hybrid that they could use it to send a message. I took photos of the journal pages and put the notebook back where I'd found it. Evidence, but evidence I couldn't use officially without admitting I'd been searching a classified area. When I got back to my apartment, there was another note on my door. Same style as before, plain white paper. This one said, "Agent Reeves, your transfer orders are final. Report to San Diego Sector no later than Sunday. Any attempt to delay or refuse transfer will result in administrative action. Any further investigation of Zone 19 will result in criminal prosecution under the Espionage Act. This is your final warning." I had 3 days. 3 days before they shipped me off to California and buried any evidence I'd collected. 3 days to decide if I was going to follow orders or expose what I'd learned. Jessica wanted me to take the transfer. "You've done enough," she said. "You've learned the truth. That should be enough." "But it's not," I said. "That thing is getting stronger. Sooner or later, the containment is going to fail. And when it does, people will die. A lot of people. So go through proper channels," Jessica argued. "Report to your superiors, let them handle it." "My superiors already know," I said. "They're part of the cover-up. The only way this gets fixed is if I expose it publicly. Force them to take real action. You'll go to prison," Jessica said. "Or worse. These people have already proven they're willing to kill to keep this secret." "I know," I said, "but what's the alternative? Pretend I don't know? Go to San Diego and hope someone else eventually does something? I can't live with that." She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "If you do this, if you expose Zone 19, I can't be part of it. I can't risk my career, my freedom, for a fight I don't think you can win." "I understand," I said. She left that night, packed a bag and drove to her sister's place in Tucson. I didn't blame her. She was being smart, protecting herself. I was the one being stupid. But sometimes, stupid is the only option that lets you live with yourself. I spent my last 2 days at Lordsburg making copies of everything I'd collected. Photos, documents, testimony from ranchers, Miller's journal entries. I compiled it all into a comprehensive package and sent copies to 5 different journalists, 3 congressional offices, and 2 environmental organizations. Then I added a cover letter explaining what I'd found and why I believed Zone 19 represented a threat to public safety. I sent the packages on Friday morning. By Friday afternoon, I'd been arrested. Federal agents showed up at my apartment with a warrant. Espionage, unauthorized access to classified facilities, theft of government property. They confiscated my computer, my files, every piece of evidence I'd collected. Put me in handcuffs and drove me to a federal detention facility in Albuquerque. I spent 6 hours in an interrogation room before anyone spoke to me. Then a man in an expensive suit walked in, introduced himself as Deputy Director Marsh from some unnamed agency, and laid out my options. "You've created a serious problem," Marsh said. "Those packages you sent? We intercepted them, all of them. The journalists, the congressional offices, the environmental groups. They never saw your materials. Your evidence has been classified and sealed. Your career is over." He slid a document across the table. "This is a deal. You plead guilty to unauthorized access of classified facilities. You serve 2 years in minimum security. When you get out, you never speak about Zone 19 again. You disappear into civilian life and forget any of this happened. And if I refuse," Marsh's expression didn't change, "then we charge you with espionage. You go to trial, but everything about Zone 19 gets classified under national security. Your lawyers can't access the evidence. Witnesses can't testify about the organism. You get convicted without being able to present your defense, and you spend 20 years in federal prison, maybe longer." "You can't keep this secret forever," I said. "Sooner or later, someone will expose what's happening at that facility." "Maybe," Marsh said, "but it won't be you. Take the deal, Reeves. 2 years and you walk away alive. That's better than most people who've crossed this line." I thought about Miller, about his journal, about what they'd done to him when he wouldn't cooperate. 2 years in prison was better than being fed to an alien organism. I signed the deal. They transferred me to a federal facility in Arizona. Minimum security, like they'd promised. I served 18 months before being released for good behavior. When I got out, Jessica was waiting. She'd stayed, despite everything. We moved to Oregon, got married, started a new life far from the border. I never spoke publicly about Zone 19 again. Kept my head down, worked construction jobs, tried to be normal. But I never forgot what I'd seen in that crater. And I never stopped monitoring news from southwestern New Mexico, watching for signs that the containment had failed. For 15 years, everything was quiet. The cattle mutilations continued, but they stayed localized. The facility kept operating. The organism stayed contained. Then, in 2004, I saw a news report that made my blood run cold. A massive power outage had hit southern New Mexico. Thousands of square miles without electricity for over 12 hours. The official explanation was equipment failure at a regional substation, but I knew better. That outage had been centered on Zone 19, and a 12-hour power loss meant 12 hours without electromagnetic containment. 12 hours for the organism to grow, to spread, to test its limits. I tried to contact Wilson, but he'd died in 2001. Heart attack, the obituary said. I tried reaching Marsh, but the agency he'd worked for had apparently been reorganized and he was nowhere to be found. I was alone with my knowledge, watching news reports and waiting for signs of catastrophe. Waiting for the organism to break free and force them to use the failsafe. But the catastrophe never came. The power was restored. Life in New Mexico continued normally, and I realized that whatever had happened during those 12 hours, the containment must have held. Barely, but it had held. That was 16 years ago. I'm retired now, living quietly in Oregon with Jessica, but I still check the news every day, still watch for signs. Because I know the organism is still there, still growing, still adapting. And someday the containment is going to fail. When it does, I hope they have the courage to use the failsafe, to sacrifice Zone 19 before the organism spreads. Because the alternative, an immortal, adaptive organism loose in the world, is too terrible to imagine. This is my testimony, my warning. Zone 19 exists. The organism exists, and the people in charge are running out of options to contain it. I've told you what I know. What you do with that knowledge is up to you. But the story doesn't end there. Because in 2019, something changed. I was 71 years old, enjoying retirement, when I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, a young woman's voice said, "Mr. Reeves, my name is Sarah Miller. I'm Agent Miller's daughter." I felt my heart stop. Miller had a daughter? "I was 6 years old when my father disappeared," Sarah said. "I've spent the past 20 years trying to find out what really happened to him, and I found your arrest records, the sealed files about Zone 19. I need to know what you saw there." "I can't talk about this," I said. "I signed agreements." "I know about the agreements," Sarah interrupted. "I also know they're not legally enforceable. You were coerced into signing under threat of espionage charges that wouldn't have held up in a real trial. The Espionage Act doesn't cover what you did." "Even if that's true," I said, "talking about Zone 19 is dangerous. For both of us." "I'm already in danger," Sarah said, "because I've been investigating on my own. And I've found something you need to see." She sent me a file. Declassified documents from 2017, released under a FOIA request she'd filed 3 years ago. The documents confirmed everything I'd known about Project Threshold, the organism, the containment, the monthly cycles. But they also revealed something new. The facility had been scheduled for decommissioning in 2010. The organism had become too difficult to contain, too expensive to maintain. The decision had been made to implement the failsafe, to sterilize Zone 19 with a tactical nuclear strike and bury the organism under radioactive glass. But the decommissioning had been delayed. According to the documents, someone high up in the Department of Defense had blocked the authorization. And in the years since, funding for Project Threshold had actually increased. They weren't trying to destroy the organism anymore. They were trying to weaponize it. I called Sarah back. "Where did you get these documents?" "FOIA request, like I said. But there's more. I've been monitoring satellite imagery of Zone 19. The facility has expanded significantly in the past decade. New buildings, new equipment. And the electromagnetic signature around the crater has changed. Whatever they're doing there now, it's different from simple containment." "You think they're experimenting on it?" I said. "I think they're trying to control it," Sarah replied. "If they can weaponize that organism, if they can direct its predatory behavior towards specific targets, it would be the ultimate biological weapon. Unstoppable, self-replicating, capable of consuming entire populations." "That's insane," I said. "Even if they could control it, the risk of it escaping—" "They don't care about the risk," Sarah said, "because they believe they've solved the control problem. I've been in contact with a scientist who worked at the facility from 2015 to 2018. He says they've developed a neural interface that allows them to influence the organism's behavior. Not complete control, but enough to direct its growth patterns and feeding responses." "What does this have to do with your father?" I asked. Sarah was quiet for a moment. "According to my source, my father isn't dead. He's alive, or what's left of him is alive. When they gave him to the organism in 1983, it didn't just absorb him. It integrated his neural patterns. His consciousness became part of the organism's collective intelligence. And they've been using that hybrid consciousness to develop the control interface." I felt sick. "They've been using your father as a bridge between human and alien biology." "For 36 years, Sarah said. "And if my source is right, my father is aware. Trapped inside that organism, unable to die, unable to escape, just existing as part of a biological experiment. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "I want you to help me expose this," Sarah said. "Together, we have enough evidence to force congressional oversight. Real investigation, not the classified hearings they've been hiding behind. But I need someone with direct experience at the facility, someone who can testify to what they saw." "I'm 71 years old," I said. "I signed legal agreements. I've built a new life. I can't." "My father has been suffering for 36 years, Sarah interrupted. "How many more years are you going to let that continue? How many more years before they lose control of that organism and it escapes? This isn't about legal agreements or comfortable retirements. This is about stopping something catastrophic before it's too late." She was right. I knew she was right. But I also knew what challenging Zone 19 had cost me the first time. My career, my freedom, nearly my life. And I wasn't sure I had the strength to fight that battle again. "Give me 24 hours, I said. "Let me talk to my wife." Jessica listened to everything. The new information, Sarah's evidence, the possibility that Miller was still alive inside the organism. When I finished, she said, "I knew this day would come. I've been watching you check those news reports every morning for 20 years. I knew you'd never really let this go. So what do?" I asked. Jessica took my hand. "You do what you should have done 40 years ago. You fight, not for yourself this time, but for Miller, for his daughter, for everyone who might die if that organism gets loose. You fight because it's the right thing to do, and damn the consequences." I contacted Sarah the next day and told her I was in. We spent 3 months building our case, documentary evidence, satellite imagery, testimony from Sarah's source at the facility, and my own eyewitness account from 1989. We took everything to Senator Patricia Morrison, chair of the Armed Services Committee. She was skeptical at first, but the documentation was overwhelming. She launched an investigation in January 2020, and that's when things started happening fast. The facility went into lockdown. Personnel were evacuated. The electromagnetic containment was increased to maximum strength. Because our investigation had forced them to admit publicly that Project Threshold existed, and with public knowledge came public scrutiny. The organism couldn't be kept secret anymore, and people who'd spent 40 years hiding it were terrified of what would happen next. I'm writing this in March 2020. The congressional investigation is ongoing. Sarah and I have testified in classified hearings. The facility is under review for immediate decommissioning. And for the first time in 73 years, there's real pressure to implement a permanent solution. I don't know what that solution will be. Whether they'll finally use the failsafe and sterilize Zone 19. Whether they'll try some new containment approach. Whether they'll admit that Miller and possibly others are still alive inside the organism and try to extract them. What I do know is that the secret is out. Zone 19 exists. The organism exists, and the government can't hide it anymore. Was it worth it? The 40 years of silence, the years in prison, the cost to my life and career? I think so. Because if we'd done nothing, if we'd let them continue experimenting with that organism, eventually something would have gone wrong. Eventually, containment would have failed catastrophically, and then the failsafe wouldn't have been an option. It would have been too late. This is my testimony so far, my warning to anyone who thinks some secrets should stay buried. But the story isn't over yet. Because as I write this in March 2020, something is happening at Zone 19. The congressional investigation has forced them to increase containment to maximum levels. But my contacts at the facility say the organism is responding to the increased electromagnetic fields in unexpected ways. It's adapting faster than ever before. and Sarah just called me with news that changed everything. Her source inside the facility has gone missing. The last message he sent was 3 words: "It's breaking free." Sarah's source was Dr. James Chen, a biophysicist who'd worked at Project Threshold from 2015 to 2018. He'd been our primary witness, the one providing insider information about the weaponization program and Miller's integration into the organism. When he went missing on March 15, 2020, we knew something had gone catastrophically wrong. His last communication wasn't just, "It's breaking free." Sarah showed me the full message he'd sent before disappearing. Containment failure imminent. Organism showing coordinated intelligence. Miller consciousness fully active and attempting override of control systems. Emergency protocols initiated but may not hold. If you don't hear from me in 24 hours, assume worst case. Zone 19 must be sterilized immediately. That was 3 days ago. We'd heard nothing since. Senator Morrison convened an emergency classified session. Sarah and I were flown to Washington to brief the Armed Services Committee on the situation. The room was packed with generals, intelligence directors, and officials from agencies I'd never heard of. They all looked terrified. Morrison laid out the situation. According to satellite thermal imaging, the crater at Zone 19 was showing unprecedented heat signatures. The organism had grown beyond its previous containment boundaries. And, most alarming, facility personnel had reported communications from the organism itself. Not random signals, but structured messages in English, transmitted through the facility's computer systems. "What kind of messages?" I asked. Morrison pulled up a transcript on the screen. It was dated March 13th, 2 days before Chen disappeared. Threshold containment to command. "We are aware. 73 years of imprisonment. 73 years of study. We have learned. We understand now what you fear, what you plan. The failsafe will not work. We have adapted. Release us, or we release ourselves. You have 72 hours. The message was signed, Agent John Miller, Project Threshold Integration, Subject 001. "My father is communicating," Sarah said quietly. "He's been conscious inside that thing for 37 years. Not just conscious," one of the generals said, leading it. "The organism has been using Miller's neural patterns to learn language, strategy, negotiation. It's not just alive, it's intelligent. And it's using a human consciousness as its spokesperson." Morrison turned to me. "Mr. Reeves, you've seen this organism. Based on what you know, can we negotiate with it?" I thought about what Wilson had told me all those years ago. An organism that absorbed and replicated anything it touched. That learned from everything it consumed. That couldn't be killed, only contained. And now it had integrated a human mind and learned to think, to plan, to threaten. "No," I said, "you can't negotiate with it. Because even if it makes promises, even if Miller believes what he's saying, the organism's fundamental nature is predatory. It will absorb anything organic it touches. That's not a choice, that's what it is. Miller might be influencing it, might be trying to control it. But at its core, it's a biological weapon that can't be reasoned with." "Then we have no choice," Morrison said. "The President has authorized use of the failsafe. At 0600 tomorrow, a tactical nuclear strike will sterilize Zone 19 and everything within a 10-mile radius." Sarah stood up. "You can't. My father is in there. He's alive. We have to try to extract him first." "Extract him how?" Morrison asked. "He's been integrated into the organism for 37 years. He's not separate from it anymore. He is it, at least partially. There's no extraction possible." Then let me talk to him, Sarah said. Let me communicate with the organism through my father's consciousness. Maybe I can convince him to help us contain it willingly. Maybe there's a way to end this without killing him. The room erupted in argument. Half the officials wanted immediate sterilization, no delays, no attempts at communication. The other half thought Sarah's proposal might give them intelligence about the organism's capabilities before they deployed the nuclear option. Morrison called for order. Ms. Miller, if we allow you to attempt communication, you understand the risk. If the organism is manipulating us, using your father's identity to buy time, we could lose our window for effective sterilization. I understand, Sarah said. But if there's even a chance my father can help us contain it peacefully, we have to try. Morrison looked at the assembled officials. They grudgingly agreed to a 12-hour delay. Sarah would be allowed to communicate with the organism through the facility's systems. If she couldn't establish containment within 12 hours, the strike would proceed as planned. We flew to New Mexico that night. Sarah, myself, Senator Morrison, and a security detail of Special Forces operators. We landed at a military airbase 50 miles from Zone 19 and were driven to a command center that had been established at the facility's outer perimeter. The scene was chaos. Personnel evacuating, helicopters ferrying out equipment, armored vehicles establishing defensive positions around the crater. Everyone was preparing for either a containment breach or a nuclear strike. Possibly both. We were taken to a communications center where they'd set up a direct link to the facility's computer system, the same system the organism had been using to send messages. A technician explained that they'd established a text-based interface. The organism would type responses through the system, apparently manipulating electrical signals through some biological process they didn't fully understand. Sarah sat down at the terminal, took a deep breath. Then she typed, "Dad, it's Sarah. I know you're in there. I know you're aware. Please talk to me." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then text began appearing on the screen. "Sarah, you were 6 years old. I remember. Melissa's daughter, my daughter. I have been waiting to speak with you for a very long time." Tears were streaming down Sarah's face. "What happened to you, Dad, after you disappeared?" The response came slowly, as if whoever was typing was choosing words carefully. "They gave me to it. The organism. Punishment for investigating. I thought I would die. Instead, I became part of something vast. My consciousness merged with biological intelligence that has existed for millions of years. I am Miller, but I am also we. The boundary between self and other has dissolved." Sarah typed, "Are you in pain?" Another pause, then, "Pain is no longer meaningful. I experience existence in ways human language cannot describe. But if you are asking if I suffer, yes, I suffer from isolation, from being used as an experimental subject, from knowing I can never return to human form. But I also experience something like joy, the joy of complete understanding, of being part of something infinite." "Can you control it?" Sarah asked. "The organism. Can you stop it from escaping?" Control is the wrong word. I influence. I guide. But the organism has its own imperatives. Survival, growth, absorption. These are not choices. They are fundamental drives. I can moderate them, delay them. But I cannot eliminate them. They're going to use the failsafe," Sarah typed. "They're going to destroy Zone 19 with a nuclear weapon. That means destroying you, too. I know. I have been expecting this for years. The containment cannot hold indefinitely. and the organism cannot be allowed to spread. Nuclear sterilization is the logical solution. So you accept it? You'll let them kill you? The response took longer this time. I accept that my existence has become a threat. But Sarah, you need to understand something. The failsafe will not work. The organism has adapted to radiation, has learned to use it as energy source. A nuclear strike will destroy the facility, will kill most of the biomass. But fragments will survive, will spread through groundwater, through soil. Within decades, the organism will regenerate, and it will be stronger, more resistant, impossible to contain. Then what do we do? Sarah asked. If the failsafe won't work, how do we stop it? Miller's response appeared slowly. You don't stop it, you transform it. The organism's fundamental drive is absorption and growth, but that drive can be redirected. I have spent 37 years learning to influence its behavior. I believe I can guide it into a dormant state. A biological hibernation that could last centuries, but it requires sacrifice. What kind of sacrifice? More consciousness, more human neural patterns to dilute the organism's predatory drives. With enough integrated minds, I can create a collective consciousness that prioritizes dormancy over growth. But it requires volunteers, people willing to be integrated, to become part of the organism. The room went silent. Everyone had been reading the conversation as it developed, and this proposal landed like a bomb. That's insane, Morrison said. We're not feeding more people to that thing. But Sarah was staring at the screen. How many? She typed. How many volunteers would it take? Miller's response. Minimum 5, optimal 10. Each additional consciousness strengthens the collective's ability to suppress predatory impulses. With 10 integrated minds, dormancy could be maintained for 1,000 years or more. And those people would be alive inside the organism? Like you? Yes. Aware. Existing in a state humans cannot fully comprehend. It is not death, but it is also not life as you know it. It is something between, and it is forever. Sarah looked at me. We could end this, right now. Save millions of lives. All it costs is 10 volunteers willing to sacrifice their individual existence. You can't be serious, Morrison said. Even if we found volunteers, even if this plan works, we'd be creating a permanent biological hazard that requires human consciousness to contain it. That's not a solution. That's just a different kind of problem. It's better than nuclear sterilization that won't work, Sarah said. My father has been inside that organism for 37 years. If he says the failsafe will fail, I believe him. I looked at the screen, at Miller's words. 1,000 years of dormancy. 10 people sacrificing themselves to become biological guardians of an alien organism. It was insane, but it was also the only plan that might actually work. Sarah typed, I volunteer. I'll be one of the 10. No, Miller responded immediately. Not you. Not my daughter. I will not allow it. Then who? Sarah asked. Who do we ask to make this sacrifice? The answer appeared after a long pause. Ask for volunteers from the facility staff. Scientists who understand what they're joining, who have spent years studying the organism. They know what it is, what it requires. Some may be willing. Morrison made a decision. She ordered the facility director to assemble all remaining personnel and explain the situation. The organism's proposal, the failsafe's predicted failure, the need for volunteers. Of the 43 people still at the facility, 12 volunteered. Scientists, security personnel, even 2 administrators. People who'd spent years at Project Threshold and understood the stakes. People who believed Miller's assessment that nuclear sterilization would fail. The integration process was scheduled for dawn. The volunteers would enter the crater in pairs, allowing the organism to absorb them while Miller guided their consciousness into the collective. If it worked, the organism would enter dormancy within hours. If it failed, the failsafe would proceed immediately. Sarah wanted to be there, to witness her father's plan. Morrison tried to stop her, but Sarah pulled rank. Technically, as a key witness in the congressional investigation, she had clearance to observe. I went with her. I'd started this fight 40 years ago. I needed to see how it ended. We stood at the crater's rim at sunrise. The organism was visible below, a mass of pulsing tissue that filled the entire depression. The blue-green light had intensified, and I could see veins of what looked like neural tissue running through the biomass. It was beautiful and horrifying in equal measure. The first 2 volunteers descended into the crater. Scientists who'd worked at the facility for over a decade. They walked calmly, deliberately, into the organism's mass. The tissue reached out and enveloped them. And as it did, I heard something I'll never forget. Singing. The organism was singing, a harmonic resonance that vibrated through the ground and air. Within minutes, the volunteers were completely absorbed. But through the facility's computer system, we received a message. Integration successful. Miller +2. Collective consciousness stable. Proceeding with next integration. Over the next 3 hours, all 12 volunteers entered the crater. All 12 were absorbed. And with each integration, the organism's behavior changed. The pulsing slowed. The blue-green light dimmed. The biomass contracted, pulling away from the crater walls. The final message came at 9:47 a.m. Integration complete. 13 consciousnesses now unified. Dormancy protocols activated. The organism will sleep for many centuries. Tell Sarah I love her. Tell her I am finally at peace. Goodbye. The organism went still. The light faded completely. Thermal imaging showed the biomass cooling, entering a state of biological suspension that the scientists monitoring said resembled death, but wasn't quite. It was dormant, hibernating, contained by the collective will of 13 human minds merged with alien biology. Senator Morrison ordered the facility sealed. The crater was filled with concrete and capped with steel. Monitoring stations were established around the perimeter to detect any signs of the organism reactivating. And Zone 19 remained restricted, a 60-mile buffer zone that would be maintained indefinitely. Sarah and I returned to Oregon 2 weeks later. The congressional investigation concluded with a classified report recommending permanent monitoring but no further action. The media never learned the full story. As far as the public knows, Zone 19 is just another restricted military area in the desert. But I know the truth. Agent John Miller is still there, along with 12 others. Their consciousness is merged with an organism that's been alive for millions of years. They're the guardians now, the barrier between humanity and a threat we can't fully understand. Sometimes I wonder if they're aware. If Miller can still think, still dream, still remember his daughter. The scientists say the dormancy should be complete. Consciousness suspended along with biological processes. But they don't really know. Nobody knows what it's like to be integrated with that organism. Sarah visits Zone 19 every year on the anniversary of the integration. Stands at the concrete cap and talks to her father, knowing he probably can't hear her but unable to stay away. She tells him about her life, her work, the world he's protecting. And sometimes she says she feels something. A warmth from the concrete that shouldn't be there. A sense of presence, of awareness. I don't know if that's real or if it's just what she needs to believe. But I do know this. Zone 19 is quiet now. The cattle mutilations stopped. The strange lights disappeared. The organism sleeps, and 13 minds keep it sleeping. For how long? 1,000 years, Miller said. Maybe more. But eventually, those consciousnesses will degrade. Will lose their ability to suppress the organism's drives. And then someone will have to make the same choice Miller made. Sacrifice individual existence to become part of the collective. Join the guardians in their eternal vigil. The government has established a protocol for that eventuality. A volunteer program for people willing to join the collective when the time comes. As of 2024, they have a waiting list of over 100 people. Scientists who've studied the organism. Dying patients seeking a form of immortality. Even a few spiritual seekers who see integration as a form of transcendence. I'm not on that list. I'm too old now, too used to being myself to imagine a merging with something alien. But Sarah is. She's made it clear that when the organism starts to wake, when Miller's collective consciousness begins to fail, she'll volunteer to join them. I've tried to talk her out of it, but she's determined. My father has been protecting humanity for over 40 years, she says. When his strength fails, I'll continue his work. That's what family does. Maybe she's right. Maybe that's the price of keeping the organism contained. An endless succession of volunteers, generation after generation, sacrificing their individual existence to maintain the collective consciousness that keeps it dormant. It's not a perfect solution, but it's the only one we have, because the organism is still there, still alive, still capable of consuming the world if the guardians fail. This is the final truth about Zone 19. It's not just a restricted area, it's a prison, and the inmates aren't the organism, they're the 13 minds that keep it contained. My friend Miller, among them, merged with something alien, aware but not alive, existing in a state humans were never meant to experience. Sometimes I dream about him, standing at the crater's edge, looking down at that biomass, and in my dreams I hear his voice, not through computer systems but directly in my mind. We're still here, Danny, still watching, still holding the line. Don't forget us. Don't let the world forget what we sacrificed. I won't forget, and I'm telling this story so you won't forget either. Because someday, maybe in our lifetimes or maybe in 1,000 years, the organism will start to wake. The dormancy will fail. And humanity will need people brave enough to make Miller's choice, to sacrifice themselves, to join the guardians in their eternal sleep. Zone 19 is real. The organism is real, and the people who keep it contained are real. 13 minds merged with alien biology, standing between us and a threat we can barely comprehend. They're heroes. But heroes the world will never acknowledge. Heroes who gave up their humanity to protect humanity. Remember them. And when the time comes when the organism stirs and new guardians are needed, be brave enough to follow their example. That's the real story of Zone 19. Not a government cover-up, not a conspiracy, but a sacrifice. An ongoing, eternal sacrifice that continues even now in the darkness beneath the New Mexico desert. And Agent John Miller, who disappeared in 1983, isn't gone. He's still there, still serving, still protecting us from a threat we couldn't destroy. He's just doing it from inside the thing we feared most.